So now that you've practiced values and shading, now we need to actually apply it to a real life object. Some of you may be wondering why it's a little bit dark in here, but I'm filming this on Friday and we just had the power go out on campus. So I think we're okay. All right. You guys are going to be using a basic light logic formula to copy so that you have something to kind of go off a visual. So let me just explain this to you, okay? This is basically what happens when light hits an object. So let's say our light source is here, okay? It hits, the number 1 is the highlight, okay? So we have our highlight right here. Okay, then 2 is a little bit darker, 3 is a little bit darker, and so on. Okay, right here, our 5 is our darkest. That is also our core shadow. Okay, interesting thing that happens is that right here, this is actually reflected light. It's slightly lighter. The darkest part, your darkest shadow, is usually not right on the edge. Okay, every lighting situation is a little bit differently, but this actually, what happens is the light hits the tabletop, let's say here, and it kind of bounces back and reflects up. Okay? All right, notice right here, our cast shadow. That, once again, is the darkest. So the cast shadow and the core shadow should be the same amount of dark. Okay? All right. So as you apply that to your drawing, this is what not to do. Can we start with the what not to do? I'm going to start this over here to my side. This is what not to do. Hopefully, as you're listening to this and watching, hey, that was a pretty good circle on the first try. What did I do? I drew super, super dark. Okay? So now as I start shading this, right? If I start doing, you know, a lighter edge over here, you know, my 2, let's say, right? No matter what I do, I have that dark outline. This is going to make things look flat. Outline. Okay? You don't want to do that. The second thing you don't want to do, remember in the last video, we talked about how value is careful observation of where the light and the shadow is, and it has to apply to the shape of the object. You notice, okay, these lines, by the way, are just, you know, you wouldn't have these, it wouldn't look like a target, like a bullseye or stripes. It's a smooth rounding object, so you have to have smooth transitions, which is why you did your value scale. So these lines are just as guidelines, but you also notice that they're following the shape of the object, okay? What some people do is they think, okay, here's my dark core shadow here. And you know what, if you do this, don't feel bad because it's kind of a common beginner mistake, okay? Hey, and we got power back. So sometimes I have people who shade like this. I'm not talking about the scribble, I'm just talking about the stripes, okay? And they try to make their shape look 3D by having stripes, okay? This is not going to look 3D because the shape of the object is curved, so we would need to make the corresponding shadows also curved, okay? So this would be more like this as you're shading, okay? Besides the scribbly part, we're not even talking about that. Okay, so no stripes, go with the shape. All right, so we've showed you what not to do, okay? Go ahead, don't feel like you have to draw like super, super huge at the beginning, but if I'm starting with a light sketch, once again, the best way to get a circle is to kind of go around it a few times like that, okay? If I'm trying to get this to look 3D, I do not want a dark outline, okay? As you start, most people, it's kind of easier to start with a darker shadow, the darker part. Some of the harder shading is this light part right here, okay? So sometimes it's like Yeesh, if I start with that, is that too light? Is that too dark? And it's kind of hard to tell. So you can go either direction. You can go from light to dark, either way. But as I've seen in class, most people, it's easiest to start with their 6B pencil and kind of come in here. So this, okay, is going to be a little bit more in here with my core shadow. Okay, it's about the general direction. If you're unsure and you're like, I don't know if I'm doing this right or whatever, you know what? Your cast shadow, you don't even have to worry about it rounding. If you want to come in here and let me say, here's an okay place to kind of outline it because this is actually an edge that you're going to see. So if you want to work on good shading technique down here and work on your darkest value, sometimes people feel a little bit more secure starting with this. All right. So you notice I'm not doing this. I'm not pushing like a madman down there. Okay. But I am working on good, consistent shading so that I don't have any like gaps of white in between. Okay? And I would continue on with that. So if that's where you start, great, okay? A lot of times what I also will do is I'm kind of comfortable shading in a certain direction. So don't feel like you have to like, you know, turn your hand all around to get, you know, some of this stuff. If it works better to shade upside down, go ahead and shade upside down, okay? So if I want to come in here and then start with that dark, and there might be a point where it kind of connects over here. But remember, you can always come back and make it darker, okay? So if I come in here, I can use a little bit of that circle technique if I want to for the shading that we talked about. I can come in here and just use this, but I'm also keeping in mind that it's got a curve. So as I'm shading, I got to make sure I'm not doing that stripey thing, okay? So I'm kind of curving it. And there's kind of a starting point, okay? And then you'll come back. So as I kind of start working on this edge, I start easing up just a little bit, okay? You notice I'm doing all this with my 6B pencil. I can barely touch the paper with my 6B pencil and get a really, really light area, okay? Because we said this is going to be just a touch lighter. See that stripe in between? My reflected light, this is too light. This is not quite, you know, enough of a difference, okay? I had my value scale we talked about the other day. The jump from this to this is a little too drastic. So I can come in here, add another layer to this. So remember, we can always add. It's a lot easier to come back in and darken something than to come in and erase it, because once you erase it, it changes the texture of your shading technique, and it's going to kind of smudge it. Okay, but I can go in there. If at a later point I decide I need this to be a little bit darker in the core shadow, I can just come back in there and add that. Okay, so the building up of values is a really good technique. Okay, so you can see how I'm starting that, right? I'm still with my 6B pencil. At this point, I could switch to my 4B pencil. I could switch to a 2B pencil. Any of these is fine. You are personally gonna kind of fall in love with different pencils, which ones you use more or not. One thing I like to do is have a scratch piece of paper off to the side, right? And if you look at the point, I'm just using a Ticonderoga one, okay? If you look at this point, I don't know if you can see that, okay? It's kind of blunt and sharp. If I start with a sharp edge, I'm gonna get a little more liney thing. If I go to like where it was blunt, I'm gonna get a little bit of a better shading. So one thing that I do is I kind of get the pencil into the right shape that I want, if that makes sense, before I start in, okay? Because right now I need to switch, and I'm gonna now go to like a lighter value, okay? Still using really light, really consistent shading, okay? I can use the circle technique that we talked about before, or if I want to just kind of go back and forth a little bit, I can do that, but once again, I'm doing a curved surface, so I may need to change where my paper is, okay? If it doesn't match up, I kind of threw this Ticonderoga pencil in there for a little bit of a difference. You know how this is like almost a more of a grainy kind of texture? Do you see that? Okay. Sometimes it's a different pencil technique. Sometimes different pencil leads are different. So see how this is slightly different looking than that? That's just something to kind of work with as you get to know your pencils. If that's bugging me, then I can come back a little bit more specifically with the 4B pencil or a 6B pencil, and I can get this texture a little less, like, remember how we talked about like beware that stucco kind of look? I can still fill that in, okay? Everybody's shading technique is gonna look slightly different, and any of this is fine. If this is what your shading technique looks like, great. If this is what it looks like, great. If this is what it looks like, then you still gotta work a little bit, okay? All right, so you can see how this is coming along, okay? We're gonna fast forward through some of this. Okay, notice how I am curving my shading now. It's another technique. Go ahead and try it. Okay, transition out of that. Whoops. Sometimes I forget where the camera is. Lightest pencil. I personally don't use my 2H pencil very much. I usually try to do it with a HB or a 2B pencil. Let me just kind of show you a little bit of the 2H pencil. 2H pencil tends to be a little bit harder, right? So especially that idea of getting a kind of duller edge to my pencil point. If it's super, super sharp, and if I do this, that's great for when I want details. Not great for like trying to get in here. So as I start working right here with that lighter pencil, I gotta really like barely touch the pencil to the paper right now. Okay, so are your objects going to be perfect the first time around? No, that's why we're gonna practice these. Okay, you're using the formula. You're gonna do some objects like this. You're gonna do 3 of them, okay, for practice. So when we look at this close up, it's still a little liney. I'm still gonna kind of rework it a little bit, but as you back up, see how we're getting that 3D effect. You can also see where it's uneven because I kind of was showing you a couple of different techniques in the middle of it. So sometimes it happens as I demonstrate and I kind of show you one thing and another, so you can actually see, you know, like right about here, it almost looks like bumpy from farther away, right? It doesn't look smooth. So I need to smooth out some of these areas. You know how I said there was a different texture kind of going on? Now you can see like what that effect is, okay? Same thing over here. So when you look at it from a little bit farther away, then you can kind of figure out where you need to go in and smooth things out, okay? So is it perfect? No, okay? Do I need to keep reworking it? Yes, okay? But what you're gonna do for your homework is do something like this. You can kind of see in relation to my palm about how big it was, okay? I can fit a couple of these on the same paper. So your homework, you have to do 1 sphere, okay? And then pick 2 other objects. Cylinder is very similar because it's rounding, okay? Cone, same thing, different shape, but it's rounding. So notice there still is a core shadow, reflected light. Core shadow here, reflected light, so the darkest isn't there. Then the one that's most unusual is the cube, okay? If you want to try the cube, great. This is the core shadow here. This is the 5 cast shadow. So this is the 4, and this is the 3, 2, 2, 1. So this is the highlight part right here, okay? So this one, there will be actual hard edges because on here, as we're making things look round, we're transitioning. If you have the edge of a cube, right, you're going to have your darkest shadow is going to be right here on the edge. Because you got to kind of think that shadow and that highlight, they're coming up. You have more of an edge, right? One side of the box, one side of the box. So anytime you have a hard line like that, before, you know, the shadows are going to be like a different, right? A hard transition like this means a sharp edge, which is good for boxes, things like that, okay? But not good for smooth objects. All right. Okay, so it's a little bit closer to being done. I went in and I did a little bit of that kind of circle strategy of shading to kind of smooth out. So, a couple things to point out on this. One, where I used the Ticonderoga pencil. It still works. You can totally draw with Ticonderoga. So, it was just a slightly different type of pencil lead. So I did have to kind of go back in and blend that because it was a little noticeable. But like I said, this little kind of circular technique works good on curved surfaces. One thing I forgot to warn you guys about. Okay, so can you see right here, this white line? Okay, that is there because, you know, I'm using a drawing pad, same as you guys. It's a little smaller one actually. But if you think about it, right now, as I'm doing all this, so say, you know, how I said don't do this over here. Guess what? Not only did I etch it on the other paper, but if I come in here and start shading, some of my marks from this one are on here. And I forgot to kind of warn you guys about that. So, if you have any of these like kind of ghost lines that show up on your shading, you can kind of see it right here, okay? Anything that you push down on really hard might get transferred to the next piece of paper. So, two options. Feel free to take the paper out. This is, I'm actually using a sketch pad. This is thinner paper. You have much thicker paper, so you're not going to get this quite as much as what I have on here. So this is not going to happen quite as much, okay? But feel free to tear the paper out as you work on it. You can put it on, you know, like another surface, right? You guys have that great, you know, cover on yours. Otherwise, use the back. Anything that's solid, if you guys have any kind of clipboard or anything like that, feel free, okay? So feel free to take it out. Or one thing you might want to do is just skip a page and then go on the next one, okay? Because say over here where I really push down to do that outline, I can see it right now. It's like a, you know, coded message. Look at that, the outline, it's there. So another good reason to draw lightly. So as you start doing this and you start pushing down a little bit harder, just realize that you may want to use the next paper for practice and then skip to the next one, or you can always start from the back for projects, tear them out as you need them, all of that. But just wanted to warn you, this one is much worse because it's much lighter weight paper. I didn't go over this with you on materials, but right here it says on my sketchbook right here, 60-pound paper. Most of the better weight drawing papers are closer to 90 pounds. So, a little more lesson on materials. Okay, your project, do what I did. One sphere, and then 2 out of the 3, your choice. You're gonna do 3 of those to try to make them good shading technique. Okay, so take your time. This isn't something you can do really quick. You do have to take your time and kind of be a little patient with it. All right, see you next time.